Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on orchids, a webinar series of 3. This is our first. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll go ahead and let everybody get in the webinar, and we'll start in a minute or two. We will be recording this webinar, so you will have the opportunity to view it at a later date as well. It will be up on our YouTube channel. We've got a good number of participants still joining in. We're up to 44. Welcome. If you have any questions during the webinar, go ahead and put them in the Q&A down at the bottom. You'll see a Q&A button. Chat has probably been disabled, but you can ask questions in the Q&A, and I will try to answer some if I can, or we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. So welcome, everybody. My name is Kathy Oliver. I'm a program assistant in the residential horticulture program here at Manatee County Extension Service. We are an extension service which is part of the University of Florida, and cooperative with every county in Florida. So no matter where you are in Florida, you should have an extension service in your county. And the residential horticulture program is helping residents of Florida in outreach and education on horticulture topics and answering lawn and gardening questions. And the Master Gardener program is a part of residential horticulture here at Extension. So Master Gardeners are our skilled, trained volunteers who really help serve in the community. And today we have with us Maureen Hirthler, a longtime Master Gardener, longtime orchid grower. She's got quite an extensive collection of orchids at home, and she also helps out here in our educational gardens with our orchid collection. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Maureen, whose topic this morning is Introduction to Orchids. Maureen?
Welcome, everybody. I am having a little bit of weird trouble managing PowerPoint this morning. It seems I can only go forwards. So I'm going to quit this and start again. What a wonderful day, though, to talk orchids. You know, it's beautiful outside. And it's beautiful outside. And the orchids are going crazy. And so we're here today to talk, of course, about orchids. I'm going to be giving 3 webinars about growing orchids in Central Florida. These are some pictures taken at the Sarasota, well, at the Kentucky Orchid Society, sorry. But this is what an
Maureen.
orchid... Yeah?
We're not seeing your slides.
Well...
And the volume seems a little low.
Okay. I will move in and I will play once again. I'm really sorry, but let's see what I can do.
You could try stop sharing and reshare possibly.
Yep, that was going to be my next thing. All right, stop sharing. Now sharing.
Okay.
Now getting. Do you see the presenter view as well, or do you see?
Yes, so
Okay.
we need the
Yeah.
slot. There we go. That's good.
All right. Well, once again, welcome to the world of orchids. This is, as I said, what an orchid show looks like. This is the display area. And around the outside, you'll have all kinds of wonderful growers selling orchids. So 3 series of webinars, or webinar 3, whatever. I'm going to tell you some facts about orchids in general. I'm going to show you a lot of pictures of their great diversity and beauty. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 most popular species to grow in our area. I'm going to use pictures from my own collection because I don't want you to be discouraged if your orchids don't look like the pictures in the magazines or online. So I don't grow show plants, I grow plants for my own enjoyment. This is a lovely Cattleya alliance called Port of Paradise. It usually has multiple blooms and it's a little bit fragrant. Webinar 2 is going to be about essential information on how to choose an orchid and care for it. We'll emphasize water and light because those are the 2 most important things. I'll talk more about the species that we'd like to grow in Florida. And I'm going to give just a little basic information about fertilizer. No one wants a plant that looks like the one on the screen. Webinar 3 is just going to talk about 2 other things that seem to be of concern to most beginning orchid growers. And that's what kind of media do you use to plant? How and when do you repot? And what do you do about these diseases that you see? The white one is Bois Duval scale, and the other is the ever popular aphid. I want to be sure that you all know that I'm not an expert. If you even go and ask all of our master gardeners, some will tell you everything I tell you here is wrong. Many people do things differently. But I do want you to know that this is information that comes primarily from the American Orchid Society. They have a wonderful website with a lot of information, and most of us consider them to be the standard. There's also information obtainable from the major growers. Some of them are specialty growers. Carter and Holmes and Chadwick's specialize in Cattleyas. Sunset Valley Orchids specialize in a sort of unusual orchid called Catasetum. And Orchids Limited, New World Orchids also specialize in a Japanese orchid called Neophenicia. Any of the brand names that you see in this presentation are for your information and illustration. They are not recommendations from the University of Florida. So our objectives for webinar 1 are to learn some facts about orchids, gain an understanding of what makes an orchid. I do want to show you the variety and the beauty of orchids. And again, we'll talk about some of the most popular orchids grown in our area. So what are orchids? Orchids are the largest flowering plant family in the world, which is pretty amazing. They grow everywhere except Antarctica. So even in the north, there are orchids, usually ground orchids, that grow. They're not just a tropical plant in general, although there are tropical species. An orchid is defined by special characteristics, and we'll talk about those in a minute. There are 28,000 different species of orchids. So when you look around, and most of us are growing Phalaenopsis, there are a lot of orchids that we haven't even, considered to grow. I also do want to say that there are 28,000 different recommendations on how to grow orchids, and we'll delve into that a little bit more in coming slides. There are 2 kinds of orchids. They're epiphytic, which are the ones that you see with bare roots, or most of the ones that we grow here in pots. They do best in an atmosphere that recreates where they grow in nature. And vandas like it hot and humid. And so if we keep those conditions for them, then we should have a lot of success. The Pathopideliums, the ones that look a little bit like aliens, are terrestrial orchids. So they're grown in a different type of mix that's a little bit closer to soil. All right, anatomy of the orchid. Luckily, it's pretty easy. In the center is a column, and that's called the pollinarium. And that's where we find our male or female sex organs. The orchids all have bilateral symmetry. So if you cut the orchid right down the middle, both sides are going to be exactly the same. Not all of these things you see are petals. There are 3 petals, one of which has been genetically modified into what we call the labellum or lip. But the outer 3 are actually sepals, the things that cover the flower as it's growing. The labellum is adapted for the species that pollinates the orchid. So it comes in many different shapes and sizes, and we'll see a little bit about that in the future. So some fun facts about orchids. How did orchids get their name? They got their name from the Greek word for testicle. I'm not quite sure why the Greeks thought it looked like a testicle, except for the fact that on the Phalaenopsis, you could sort of make a case for an oval item hanging from a stalk, but that's why we use the name. What size are orchids? They're as small as a dime or over 100 pounds. You can see one of the almost 100-pound ones at Sylvie Gardens. And I have a picture of a dime-sized one that will be coming up somewhere. Vanilla, our favorite, probably our favorite flavoring, is also grown from Vanilla planiflora. It does very well here, but it's an incredible climber. It's like a 30-foot climber. So you have to think very carefully about planting it. And orchids, they can live as long as 100 years, which is, of course, none of my personal experience. But some have been passed down for generations, particularly in Europe. So talking about the labellum, no orchid presentation can be complete without this story. The pictures are just a tad fuzzy here, and for that I apologize. But this is an orchid called Ingressian Padale. This is an epiphytic orchid that grows in nature, not necessarily, but we grow them in pots here, although we don't have to. It was described in nature by a French botanist in 1798, but it didn't get really much press until it was described in 1882. Darwin at that time was working on his theory of evolution. And he postulated that this orchid could only be pollinated by an insect species that had a beak as long as this column. I don't want to say column, but as long as this labellum. People, of course, thought that he was a bit unusual in his thinking. But here we have, eventually found in Madagascar, was Xanthopam morgani. It's the only member of its species found in Madagascar. And after it was found, people agreed with Darwin about natural selection. Think about that, it's the sole member of the species. What is its purpose except to pollinate that single orchid? And over time, of course, in order to get pollinated, the orchid adapted to its needs and genetically began to grow this long lip. So Darwin's orchid's a pretty important orchid in the history of evolution. Here are the two side by side, and you can see that they are very evenly matched. So another big part of dealing with orchids is how did they get those names? Well, Linnaeus in the 1700s did us a nice favor. He classified all growing things as genus, and species. That's it, just two. So for example, an orchid could be named Laelia, which is the genus. The family, of course, is Orchids, Orchidaceae. The species is Amseps. So, I mean, we could really go with that. But then people started to hybridize, and we needed more ways. So Louis Claude Richard in 1817 is responsible for the ever increasing list of names and letters that you see associated with orchids. So here's a good example. Oncidium Shary Baby Sweet Fragrance. This is the chocolate orchid. It really does smell like chocolate. The genus here is Oncidium. The Grex, that is the primary hybrid, is Shary Baby, which the primary hybrid is usually the Oncidium crossed mated with itself. And that gave us this lovely Shary Baby. And the cultivar, that's what makes it different from every other Shary Baby, is called Sweet Fragrance, but there's a lot more of them. So anyway, this is one way to look at those names, but it is kind of confusing. This is a lovely orchid that I grow called CTNA. Why not? It is really, I don't say this very often, but it is really easy. Unfortunately, it has a new name, which I can't even pronounce, but it's been moved to another genus. So things change too. But this is what we call an intergeneric. It is a cross between two species, a Cattleya and a Browtonia. So that's how it got its letter names, CT and NA. I'm not sure how they, picked that, but that's what we have here. So again, the primary hybrid, which would be the CTNA. Its name is Roundabout, crossed with another cross of Cattleya aurantiaca and whatever sanguinea. So if you cross this one with this one, if you cross this one, with this one, oh man, I'm a little confused. Okay, cross this one with this one, and you get this one. So you get a little bit narrower petals, and you get a larger yellow spot. All right, so what does an orchid hobbyist need to be successful? Number one thing is humility. You need to remain teachable, and remember that there are as many opinions out there as orchids, and so be willing to learn. Curiosity. It helps to gather information from many of those sources. You can trust a lot of people with experience, but you also need to do some research about what you're trying to grow at responsible sites. And then eventually you're going to choose what works best for you. So you have to be curious about, does this one grow well for me or doesn't it? The other thing that you really need is an acceptance of impermanence. They don't last forever. A lot of people say to me, well, I can't grow, Phalaenopsis because I always kill them. Well, you don't kill them. That's nobody's intention. But plants die. And then you look back and see what culture changes might improve their health. But don't give up, because that's just the way life is. And again, the most important thing is to find what works for you. Many people at the Orchid Societies have told me that they have had more than 100 orchids, pass away before they got the hang of it. So yeah, be humble. It's not always easy. So as I said, all these orchids are from my collection. I want to show you their warts and all, so that you have reasonable expectations of yourself. Here is the Ports of Paradise. You can see I've got some little abnormalities here on the sepal, probably a little bit of fungus. So here's my table from home. The first one is BLC, Brachiolalia Catalia cross, Marcella Coss, pink marble. This is a large corsage type orchid, lovely fragrance, frilly lip, which is a favorite of a lot of people, as well as some frilly petals. Next, we have Phalenopsis Fuller's Sunset, which is a lovely combination of yellow, kind of yellow-green with a pinky red lip. The Oncidium speculatum is the dancing lady. And Noid means no ID, which is just some orchid that got in your collection. This one my husband rescued off a pile of garbage, so he did a pretty good job. Table 2. These are some of the more uncommon orchids that I really enjoy growing. Felicia Rosalani is in that Catasetum family. This is completely dormant in the winter. In fact, all the roots die and you're just left with dead looking bulbs. But this is what you get when you're a little patient. This smells like camphor, but a little more pleasant. Procatamala Walnut Valley Lime Stars, how they got their name is pretty obvious. Let me see, BLC Granny Smith. Just look at the lip on that with all those little tiny red spots. And if you compare each flower, in general, the symmetry is the same, but the placement and number of little drops might be different. And finally, Odontoglossum gloriosum. This gave me 5 or 6 blooms this season. This is not a show plant because it's upside down. It's not. It's rotated. Obviously, you'd like your lip to be in the bottom. But again, these are my orchids, and nobody's perfect. Whoop. This is Encyclia cochleata, the octopus orchid, pretty obvious as well. I have a purple form that I think you'll see somewhere along the line. This is also not difficult to grow, and I just love the octopus. Dendrobium auriculatum is an interesting dendrobium because it's reed-shaped with the small skinny leaves. It's also not deciduous. It blooms all year round. It really does. And I almost always have some flowers on there. And finally, Rhynchosolistis colestris, which is a Vanda type hanging plant that puts out these rather large spikes of flowers that are very fragrant as well. All right, and my favorites are the Bulbophyllums. These are interesting because some of them smell nice and a lot of them don't smell very nice at all. This is Bulbo William Chang. This one smells like a dead rat, really. Coryphifolum is a multi-bloomer and gives you these nice little fans. The sparkles are real. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm not having the best luck here. Anyway, Bulbophyllum bloomii, which is one of the main breeding plants. Bulbophyllum Medusa, which is absolutely gorgeous, especially when it gets more than one flower. Bulbophyllum longissimum. This is a huge plant, as you can see, and had dozens and dozens of these blooms, which are bifoliate or double. And at the end is another bulbo that I can't remember its name, but the entire bulbo is kind of spotted. And you can see that a number of these I mount on cork, and we can talk about that later. Odds and ends. So I put auriculatum back because I really like it. And the other one is Neophenicia Falcata. There are a lot of grexes in Neophenicia Falcata. And this is the samurai orchid. Many of these are hundreds of years old. They were gifts that one samurai gave to another when they visited. This is a fairly young plant, and my mossing is not great, but eventually there'll be a higher column of moss. It's in a traditional clay pot, And it has these absolutely lovely pink flowers. I think its name is, yeah, I want to say its name, but anyway, its name has some, oh, cherry blossom. There we go. Um, it's very interesting in Japan. The most important part of the display is actually the pot. And there are, hundreds of year old pots that are intricately decorated. Many people have continued that tradition, and folks display all their pots in a locked cabinet, and then take the orchid out of whatever they're growing in and putting in this pot. The second thing that is judged is the foliage. As far as judges are concerned, they're only growing it for the foliage. And the differences are small. There are some that have yellow on the sides. But when you start looking at them, you can see sort of a different arrangement of the petals. And the flowers, the last thing they look at, most of these are judged without flowers, which I think is kind of interesting. I have one now with white flowers. Its name is Yodomatsu, and it has a little bit more flowers than this. It's very pretty. All right, I'm going to take a drink first. Most popular ones we grow here in Florida are Phalaenopsis, Cattleya, and Oncidium. Dendrobiums are also popular, and of course, lavandas. Some examples, Fuller's Sunset, another yellow and pink orchid. The Cattleya, I don't grow, I have a few Cattleya species, but in general, I don't grow them. So this is that Laelia anceps. And then the dancing lady is an Oncidium. So Phalaenopsis. They need low light with least exposure. Many people find that they do best on a lanai. They like to be almost dry before watering. So not so much that, they're starving for water. They enjoy a little bit cooler temperatures. Again, why people mostly grow them on lanais. And they have very long-lasting blooms. These are also amenable to growing mostly bare root on trees that face east. And many people do that as well. They often have very long-lasting blooms, weeks or some for months. Two that I have in my collection is a miniature Phalaenopsis blueberry and Phalaenopsis goldfinch M227. And they're pretty reliable bloomers for me. This one was in our master gardener greenhouse this year. This is show quality. As you can see, it has more flowers to come. It's arranged in a perfect cascade. And I believe it has another spike in the back, but this is some of the things you can see if you come visit us. This is my neighbor, Jean. She has this Phalaenopsis White Dream. It's called a V3 just because of where it is in the genetic process. And this also is a show orchid. As you see, she's got two beautiful cascades. Flowers are symmetric. They're all in the right position. And I'll talk a little bit about Jeannie and her orchids along the way. There's another one of hers, again, grown on her lanai or in this, or really on the lanai east facing. This is called Phal Ox Happy Girl, 1592. This is a Harlequin orchid, which is one that is bloomed for this interesting pattern of white and pink. Let's talk a little bit about Cattleyas. Cattleyas tend to be very sensitive to their conditions. They like to be where they like to be. They're definitely the right plant, right place. People collect them because of the variety within species. As I said, I'm not really a species grower because they're kind of fussy. But here's a picture of Cattleya skinneri alba. Alba means white form. So that implies that there are red forms and pink forms and so on. And as I said, they They're fussy if you don't get it right, but if you get it right, you just get gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous blooms. And again, it's not that hard. There are ways to tell if it's in the right place or not. And so that's the Cattleya. Here are some of mine from the Cattleya. We call it Cattleya Alliance because they've been bred with other species along the way. Some, like the Potnara Melinda Rose Funky Christie, has been bred so many times that they had to come up with Potnara as a new species. But we see again is Forcella Cos and Melinda Rose Funky. And last year, my best result was with Rinko whatever, I think that's Rinko Stylus, Curtis Wayne Compton Heron. And as you can see, I had just tons of blooms in a really healthy looking plant. A reliable bloomer for me is RLC Dick Smith Paradise. It's a smaller flower, but it's got such interesting coloration that I really like it. Cattleya culture. They like bright light, some sun, but not direct sun. Nobody likes direct sun. It tolerates heat as long as you have good humidity and circulation. And you water these only when they're dry. Again, not so dry that they're all wrinkled, but dry. These are some of my Oncidiums. Oncidium Twinkle Peak Profusion. And these smaller twinkles just smell fabulous. I do grow Sasulatum. We have a lot of these in the greenhouse, and when they're all in bloom, it's just beautiful. Oncidium Sherry Baby, the chocolate orchid. And I wish I could remember what the other one is, and I don't even think it's an Oncidium, so forgive me for having it there. Oncidium. Care depends upon the species. There are a lot of species. They like bright light, no direct sun. Tolerates heat with good humidity and circulation, and you water them when they're half dry. I had an Oncidium that was at least 8 years old that had never bloomed. And I had it in pretty bright light, but nothing was happening. So last year I took them and I put them in really, really bright light, like with my Vandas. And when you do that, you get these speckles on the leaves, which are fine. But I had profuse blooming this year. So sometimes it's just a matter of a couple foot candles of light. So orchids you're tempted to buy. The Pathopideliums are really popular because they're absolutely gorgeous and they're very different. But these are terrestrial orchids. If you're growing the other orchids we talked about, it's difficult to get used to the conditions that these need, as well as their own potting mix. You can grow them when you get them in the right space. I've had 2 bloom this year, one that looks like the purple one with stripes and dots, and one that looks like the green one in the middle. The other ones are growing well, but I haven't seen much happening with them. Vandas. Vandas, again, are right plant, right place. And they like very bright light, but not direct sunlight. Many people just slap these on trees and they go crazy. Mine are not one of my specialties. I have them, but they just don't like to behave for me. So I'm unlucky, but I'll keep trying. So where to begin to get all this information? First thing is to join your local orchid society. Manatee and Sarasota orchid societies are great. And there's a lot of information. You'll see beautiful plants. There are plants for sale. It's fabulous. If you're really serious, join the American Orchid Society. It's not a lot, not expensive. But with the membership, you get a book called Your First Orchid. You get an orchid source directory. And anybody who's in there is a proven, honest, healthy, experienced producer of orchids. So they're very, very good if you like to buy online, which I do. You also get a monthly Orchids magazine, which is basically something to drool over. But there are a couple pieces that talk about growing conditions and some other things, and they give you a $30 gift certificate. So, and the next place to come, of course, to ask a master gardener. Some people are more into orchids than others, but everybody can help you with the basics of culture or refer you to Helen, who is really our doyen of orchid growing, or myself, or John. There are a fair number of us that like orchids. So, good. I think we have plenty of times for questions, and I know there's probably going to be a lot of them. So, Kathy, do you want to start reading the questions, or would you like me to?
I'd like to encourage everybody to put your questions, if you have them, in the question and answer box. We don't have any open questions right now.
Oh, please ask questions, because I left all this time. I thought folks would have a lot of questions. It's not embarrassing. You can ask the very basic questions to something more complicated. I hate to not have us have any questions.
Okay, our first question is from Jean, and she would like to know what orchids are native to Florida.
That's a great question. There are a number of native Florida orchids. The first one is, oh my goodness. Look at me, my brain totally lost. I'm going to say Encyclia tampiensis. That's what it is, like for Tampa. You can definitely see these off the Orchid Walk in Mayaca State Park. They're a smaller orchid. They're quite beautiful. And there are quite a few more encyclias, which are native orchids. The other orchids we've talked about really aren't native in Florida. There are several more whose names I don't remember, but there certainly are a number of species that grow native in Florida. I have tampiensis and one of its crosses.
Okay, our next question is from Georgina. Are there any orchids that will do well outside and in full sun?
Full sun, no. Most of, probably all of us who grow here use shade cloth. And what is it, April? I'm actually going to start to put mine out pretty soon. We use 50% shade cloth. Either most of us have some sort of standing structure that we can place the shade cloth over, but no, even the van does need protection from Florida sun.
Another question, is Encyclia cochleata a native?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to look that up. I don't believe so, but I could be wrong.
Okay. Jan says, I have a Dendrobium that has a healthy stalk but no leaves. I do have a new stalk growing from the base of the plant. What do I do with the original stalk?
You're fine. You're absolutely fine. Those types of Dendrobium are the nobile, and they have a dormant period in the winter. So the stalks will lose their leaves and look like dead sticks. When things start to come back in the spring, you will see the new growth, and that's probably where your flower is going to come from. And I keep those dead stalks, even though they're unattractive, until they're really dead, because they do hold some nutrients for the new growth. But eventually they will be really dead, and that's the only time I take them off. But it sounds like your Dendrobium is doing great.
I just looked up Encyclia cochleata, and it is native to South Florida and parts further south.
Great.
It's also called clamshell orchid.
It's the octopus orchid, in my opinion. But yes, clamshell is another name for it.
Okay. How do you attach an orchid to a tree?
The main principle is to make a little patty of just damp moss. And this is just until your orchid gets established, but it should be pretty thin, but it should be there. And put that against the tree. Put your orchid on top of that with its bare roots. And then you're going to wrap it with something. To get it started, I use the old pantyhose that I don't need anymore in Florida, and cut that into strips and wrap it really tightly. The really tightly part is important. If you like a more natural look, you can use burlap. And if you put another little bit of moss on top, you could use fishing line, but that tends to cut a little bit, and you don't want that in the beginning. And that's how you mount them on trees. Once you see the roots have started to grow into the tree, you can remove your wrapping, and you may need to attach it in some way to the tree if it's not tight, because you want to keep this always tight. But that's all you really need to do to plant it on a tree to get started. And then once it's started, it won't need the covering, and it probably won't even need the moss.
Okay, Lisa says I have some brown spots on many leaves of one plant. Could this be a disease? Can you talk a bit about problems like this? And I know you will be covering some of this in the later sessions.
Well, brown spots on leaves. Yes, they can be fungal, they can be bacterial, or they can be just what happens, like with the Oncidium and the sun. So if the brown spots have a yellow halo, they're probably fungus. If they're mushy and weepy, they're probably bacterial. And viral is fairly hard to diagnose. Most of the times when I get small little stipples of black spots, I look cheerfully at them and ignore them. If I get one that I think might be bacterial, I remove it and put cinnamon on the cut end. And if I have a virus, there is a home test I use, and I've been spared, but I do test ones that look, what the hell is this? But if you bring something like that to the extension office, or send us some pictures, a variety of pictures, we can do a fairly good job of putting it in the correct category and helping you choose how to treat it.
Okay. How can you tell well, I'm not sure exactly what this question is. What orchid is by looking at the bulb? Can you tell just by looking at the shape of the plant?
Some orchids you can do that. Cattleyas definitely look different than Oncidiums. Phalaenopsis are obvious. But once you get into any of the crosses, obviously it becomes very difficult to just ID the plant from how it looks without flowers. So you'll often see that the advice you'll get is, well, we really can't tell what it is until it's flowered. So, I guess that's sort of a divided question, and sometimes you can, sometimes you can't.
Okay, another question about native orchids. Are they available in stores?
Yes, they're available at growers. I've never seen one in a store because they have to be outside. They don't handle shipping well, long shipping, like from China. But I do know local growers have them, and they're certainly available online.
Okay, very good. Chanel says she received a basket of 3 different plants, a combo of 3 plants. Should I take the orchids out and grow them by themselves?
Yes, absolutely. Make sure you know what the 3 types are so you can choose what type of media to put them in. But yes, you should take them all apart because they may have different needs and you don't want them to be crowded. And then you'll have 3 orchids.
Okay, Karen has heard about ghost orchids. I think they grow in the Everglades. What do you know about these?
Ghost orchids are in a category without many leaves. So it's very hard when you're out there trudging around in the Everglades getting bitten by mosquitoes to identify one when it's not in bloom. So that was one of the reasons we didn't know about it for a long time because nobody saw it. When they bloom, of course, they're gorgeous. They're not that big of a flower, but they're very white, so they stand out against the foliage. And they're rare. I'm not sure you could even buy one unless you knew the person personally. And because they live in the Everglades, you don't see them growing anywhere else because, that's a unique habitat with, stippling light, a lot of rotting vegetation, high humidity, frequent rain. But they have, obviously given rise to many different, stories and movies. And they're pretty amazing. But they tend to be something that you gaze at longingly in books.
Okay, Jenny would like to know, do you ever cut the long, dry stalk from Dendrobium?
Only when it's really, really dead. I try not to remove them if they would have any green in the center because they are a reservoir for food for the new growths. It's one of the reasons I don't do nobles because my husband keeps asking me why I'm growing dead sticks in pots. There are other varieties of Dendrobium that I do grow, and they don't have the dead stalks. So, but yeah, just just sigh and hope for the new growth.
Where can I find out how to correctly plant an orchid?
Well, that's going to be one of our webinars coming up. Whoops. I do this right now. There we go. That'll be one of our webinars coming up. It's not as difficult as people think. It's nothing to be afraid of. And it's easy to do it right if you know what you're doing. So I'm going to save that information for the future so you can join us then.
Okay, and our next webinar on basic orchid care is same time next week. What medium and type of container is good for planting orchids?
Again, we'll be doing more of that next week, but it tends to differ by the type of orchid you're growing and the conditions in which you grow it. Many people use unglazed terracotta. That's fine. It breathes. It dries out evenly, and that's a good place to start. I would advise something that has structure to it, and of course, excellent drainage. And I tend to use plastic pots, but they do have they have a limited life here in Florida if they're getting a lot of sun. But I like this because I can see what's going on in the pot. And potting media, that's one of those things where there are 28,000 answers. But most people use a bark-based product. And I don't use plain bark, but I do use a bark mix. And again, we'll be talking about that next week. But that's a complicated subject in some ways.
Okay. I have an orchid that is called Lady of the Evening. It has beautiful fragrance at sunset. Do you know the genus of this orchid?
That is Brassivola nodosum. And yes, it's a beautiful orchid and it smells wonderfully. It really does.
How do you pot or mount a pendant dendrobium?
A pendant dendrobium, you're probably going to pot the same way as as every dendrobium. But a nice thing to do is to get one of those slat boxes and plant it in there with a larger medium. And then you have something all ready to hang. And that really is a nice way to do the pendant ones, because then you don't have to find something for them to sit on, so you can do it. So that's probably what I would do if I had one of these lovely pendant orchids, and that's usually what I see people doing on growers pages.
Okay. Do you always put cinnamon on the orchid when you cut off the leaf? Can you tell us why?
Cinnamon is a natural antifungal, and cut surfaces are just a party invitation for fungus. And so that gives it a little natural protection until it seals. I use something different. I use a spray chemical called Physan 20 that's a little bit more powerful. But for the average grower, cinnamon is inexpensive, and it does work. It works very well.
Okay, I think we had a question in the chat. That's all that was in the Q&A. Let's see. I have Phalaenopsis orchids mounted to a pygmy date palm. It has spots on the flowers. I believe that it's from watering. It blooms every year. Should I be concerned? And will it spread to others?
If it's from watering, you don't really need to be concerned. You just have to think about how your Phalaenopsis is watered and when it's watered. If it's just watered by rainwater, then sometimes with Phalaenopsis you do have to sneak out and shake it, or wipe the leaves, or clean down in the center part to remove some of the water. The only reason to worry about it is if it continues and they have those spots, they also they're a party for bacteria, and so that could cause issues, and that could also spread to your Phalaenopsis. So I think that's just a little cultural problem with water. And there's always a controversy about whether you water your Phalaenopsis from below or whether you water your Phalaenopsis from above. And as I said, most people say if you water them from above, then you go around, drying them off, particularly in the summer.
Okay, and what is the best fertilizer for orchids?
Oh, that's coming up in the future too. But the best basic fertilizer is something with a mixture that's called 10-10-10. That's a balanced fertilizer, usually with micronutrients, and that tells you how much nitrogen, phosphate, or phosphorus and potassium is contained. That's a perfectly adequate fertilizer. Use it always, of course, according to the package directions. And I will talk about some of the other mixes and why you might want to use them in the future. But if you only have a small number of orchids, just the 10-10-10 is excellent.
Okay, it looks like we have run through all the questions for today. Excellent questions and excellent answers. Thank you, Maureen, for sharing your expertise. We have some compliments in the chat. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone will join us same time next week for basic orchid care. And then the week after that will be advanced orchid care. So stay tuned.
Thank you all so much for this opportunity. I could talk for hours on orchids, so I've enjoyed having 1 hour to just devote to that. And I hope to see you for the next 2 webinars. They get a little bit more complex, a little more interesting. So hopefully I'll see you next week. Thank you, Kathy, for organizing all this.
Thank you, Maureen, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.